I guess I can ask a question to get things started. So, if I wanted to start, I have never done anything before, but I wanted to start selling cookies or something like that at my local farmers market. What would be the first step to make sure I'm doing things legally? Who would be my contact? Where do I go to sort of start the process so I don't get in trouble?
Oh, you're a mute, Nicole.
I would start with the regulatory authority. I usually, in Rhode Island, we're small, so we have one agency all housed together, which makes it so easy. But I know most of the states aren't situated like that. So you would look to your local town regulatory authority, or Department of Health to see what the requirements are. First of all, to see what you're allowed to make. And generally speaking, I know from Rhode Island that they're very helpful and they want to help people succeed. And so they do try to get on board, understand the risks, and help people move along. So I would start with the regulation.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you're not familiar with the different cottage laws in particular are really variable dependent on your state. So if you lived in Vermont, for example, and then you moved to Indiana, don't think you could do the same thing. I could tell you for a fact, Vermont is really pretty, their product line is pretty wide. So I just put in the chat box a list of cottage food law regulations that are summarized. And so I just want to echo to Nicole's point. You want to talk with your state reps, particularly if you're doing cottage, it's mandated by the state regulators. So most of these regulations have websites to show you how to file for those licenses. But it might be helpful to use that resource I just mentioned to kind of get an idea of how profoundly these different states might allow different food processing at home.
Yeah, Rhode Island's pretty conservative and they don't allow acidified foods, but Connecticut will allow acidified foods, I believe. So, and yeah, Vermont allows more processing types of processing than most of the other New England states.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both for presenting. So I have one question about canned foods. Mm-hmm. So what are your state's point of view on canned jams and jelly?
Oh, yeah.
My gosh, I forgot. I don't even know if Rhode Island can do canned jams and jellies.
In Massachusetts, you can do jellies and jams, but not pepper jelly because that's not technically jelly. And so jellies and jams,
mm-hmm.
federally have they have a standard of identity. And so if your product meets the standard of identity of jellies or jams in the state of Massachusetts, you can produce those at home. Now, one but though is being careful is that I caution the standard of identity because I found particularly for small scale operations, they do some things that deviate. So for example, sometimes like a wise tale is to use butter to help break foaming on the surface. And that has two challenges. One, you have now introduced an allergen that must be declared, and you no longer follow the regulation of a jelly or jam because it's not supposed to be in. There's no jellies and jams only have fruit and pectin and lemon juice or something like that. So you now don't follow the regulation, and then you therefore technically can't produce it at home.
So there's two things here. So Rhode Island for cottage food, I'm pretty certain only allows some baked goods. But if you have a farm and you do farm home manufacture, you can do jams and jellies, I believe. So there's two different similar but different regulations. If you're a farm growing produce, you have a little more, you could produce a little bit more in your home.
Then a follow-up question is, have you had any questions either from the inspectors or the farmers about recipe modification? That means they are not really adding butter or something else, but reducing sugar or play with
on you, Dr. Fang. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, just to be clear, when we say for canning that you have to have your product vetted by a process authority. And so that means it was approved by some scientist that says thou shall cook it at this time and this temperature. If you decide to say, I can make it low calorie or lower sodium, I'm just gonna I'm just going to change the recipe means I'm just going to have to go back and get it reestablished by a process authority to confirm that the formulation still has a hurdle to control the safety of the food. So for those, it can be very costly, by the way, to get these scheduled processes. They're in the New England area, the cheapest is about $250 per recipe. So if I have a new product line, I have 5 products, it's very expensive. So to help try to offset some of those costs, UMass a few years ago, in collaboration with the Mass Department Ag, we actually converted recipes from Ball Book into scale appropriate, process authority approved formulations. And we do give those away for open access if you sign a form. And the form basically says, you understand that you cannot change the recipe. You cannot change the recipe and you still have to get trained, but I'm willing to share them, but you have to understand the rules because canning has a high risk if you don't do it correctly.
Thank you. So I know, like, I recognized a couple of names on this phone call, on this webinar, and I want to thank the audience from different parts of the country join us to learn about this unique topic.